it's easy to talk about what's going on in Capitol Hill and what's going on in Congress. And here we get to actually have the conversation of what exactly is happening and what our senator is doing in Washington and all the great work that he's been doing. So I am super excited. We have an excellent lineup here. We've got Senator Warnock, we've got Taifa Smith Butler, and Ai-jen Poo, who will be joining us a little late, but we're very excited to be having this conversation. Let me start it off with Senator Warnock because he's got limited time, and we're grateful that he's even given us this much time, given everything that's been going on today on the Hill and the signing of the bill. First of all, I think I don't even know how to introduce Senator Warnock because he's like a rock star. And it's amazing to have a senator, not just that he's senator, but the fact that he's lived in the communities, he's been in the communities, he comes from the communities, he's worked and talked to everybody in the community. And to have someone become senator who has lived the life, walked the life, been the life, it's amazing to have someone like him as senator. I remember, I live in Texas, and I remember when he was running, how excited we all were to go volunteer on his campaign and to be a part of it, just because the inspiration he brings to all of us and the belief in everything that he believes in. So Senator Warnock, I could give you an official introduction, but I just want to say it's so heartfelt to have you here. It's so amazing the work you are doing. I know he can't talk about this, but I will say, he is up for re-election, so we got a lot of work to do. And this is why it's important that we hear what he's doing so we can help at the time when he does run. And Senator, thank you for everything you're doing for Georgia, but more importantly, thank you for everything you're doing for the country, because everything you're talking about, everything you're working on is important to every single one of us, and grateful that you're here to make the time given the day.
Well, thank you so very much, Sonal. It's wonderful to be here with you. Grateful for your leadership, for your voice. I'm honored to be here with you and Taifa Smith Butler. Grateful for the work of the center and helping us to get the policy right. And hello, everybody. I can't see you, but you can see us. And I'm just honored to do this work. As you point out, just a couple of hours ago, in fact, I was at the White House for the signing of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. After hearing this for years, we can say it, and it's really true. It's Infrastructure Week. Infrastructure Week. It's Infrastructure Week. And this is great news for our country, for the people of the state of Georgia. Is great news for those of us who are living in this moment, pressing our way still through this pandemic, and it's great news for a future that is wide enough and broad enough and big enough to embrace all of our children. We made an important step in that right direction today with the signing of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, which I was pleased to support, and to get some key provisions in. The people of Georgia stood up in an amazing way and put Democrats in the majority. And here's what I want. Let me say this. I know it's been frustrating to watch the sausage making take place in Washington, D.C. And if you think it's frustrating watching it from at home, imagine watching it up close. You can even smell it, and it's not pretty. But I do want to put this in perspective for us a little bit. You know, when Joe Biden won the White House in November, on November 4th, who would have imagined that you'd need 2 Senate seats to determine who would be in charge of the Senate? Both seats would be from the state of Georgia. And if somebody gave you those odds, both Senate seats in the same state, who would have picked Georgia? But Georgia delivered. We have the majority. And as frustrating as it may feel right now, we're having really a rather high-minded conversation about possibility. And had it gone the other way, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We're we're having a debate, whether we're talking about the infrastructure bill or Build Back Better. We're talking about, how much are we going to invest in green energy, in our bridges and roads and tunnels, in our public transportation infrastructure, in our ports. We're having a debate about how much we're going to invest in universal pre-K, in healthcare, and a whole range of things. And so I'm excited about this work and honored to be in the mix at this time. This is a great piece of legislation that the president signed today. Literally, it'll put $65 billion of investments in deploying accessible broadband. I move all across our country, all across the state of Georgia. About 10% of the people of Georgia do not have access to good quality broadband. There are parts of our state and probably your state where you drive and your call drop, there's no broadband. And broadband is to the 21st century what electricity and electric lights were in the 20th century. You're talking about telehealth, which was important before the pandemic. Think about how important it is now. Think about how important that is to rural communities that often don't have the same access to medical care. In our state, unfortunately, because they've refused to expand Medicaid, we've had 10 hospitals to close in our rural areas in 10 years. Telehealth will be critically important to these communities, even as we try to rebuild their healthcare systems. So $65 billion placed there, focused on broadband. About $14 billion of that is focused on what we call digital equity. That is making sure that low-income Americans can actually afford broadband. You have to deal with accessibility and affordability. So with these vouchers, we enable low-income Americans to be able to afford broadband. And then in addition to that, I have another standalone bill in the upcoming Build Back Better bill called the Device for Every American Act, which places $500 million of investments in making sure that people in low-income communities can get a laptop or an iPad. Think about children trying to do their homework and the parents of those children trying to find a job. We're in a wired world. And if you're on the other side of that digital divide, you're on the other side of prosperity and possibility. In addition to that, building a green energy future. I have a bill in the legislation that literally focuses on greening our yellow school buses through electric school buses and other alternative forms. Just really, really great investments. Our ports to deal with the supply chain issues that we're dealing with in this moment and to strengthen our economy into the future. I can go on and on about all the wonderful stuff in this bill, but it's really about positioning our country to be competitive well into the future.
After all these months on Zoom, I still can't figure out how to unmute myself, Senator. Senator, how much time do we have with you? I just want to make sure we use your time well.
My team is pulling me, but I'm gonna steal 2 more minutes.
Can I ask you one question, and maybe that's we can, and then we'll move over with Taifa and
Sure.
Aichen. Senator, it would be great, I think, for everybody listening to hear from you, like when I'm sure people's questions are, when does this money start moving? How soon are we going to see these jobs come to our state? How soon are we going to see broadband happen? What are things that we can do to help you all as now you move from legislation to implementation?
Well, for me, it can't come soon enough, but you'll start to see these investments beginning next year. Some of this stuff you'll see immediately, but some of these things are, this is deferred maintenance. So some of it will take some time. And this is not the kind of package we saw, for example, right after the Great Recession, where that whole idea was to send a kind of jump start to the economy. The pandemic has created a different set of issues for us. But you will begin to see these investments take place certainly the beginning of next year. And some of the things, for example, around our ports, I was able to get investments for Georgia moving just last week. So the work is happening. And then to your question about what you can do, you can continue to lobby your legislators. We need both of these bills. We need the infrastructure bill that was just passed, but we also need to invest in the infrastructure of our collective humanity. We need early childhood or pre-K. We did expand the child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan, which cuts child poverty in half. That needs to be extended. That happens in the American Rescue Plan. If we don't extend it, it ends in December, and after cutting child poverty in half, we'll go back and double it. So the good news is that's currently in the bill. Georgia is one of 12 states that's refused to expand Medicaid. That's why our hospitals are closing. And we got 646,000 Georgians, 4.4 million Americans in the coverage gap. Even after the bill was shrunk, the good news is the provisions that I fought for to close the circle on the Affordable Care Act, I think was passed 10 years ago, and to close the coverage gap, those provisions are in the bill.
Senator, I just first of all, thank you for getting this bill passed, for continuing to work for the next bill that I know we're all working very hard for. Know that you have a community of people who would love to be your support as you need to get the message out once the next bill also gets passed. And I think we all want to be here because we know that this is important for our country. This is important for our democracy. And you're right. It took Georgia to make this happen, and you're making a bill happen, which is incredible. So we are grateful for you, and we're grateful for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. Keep the faith.
Thank you, Senator. Taifa and Ijen, so grateful to have you both here. I can't imagine two more amazing women to be on a Zoom call with or a panel with ever, because you two are just like the definition of badass women. And I know, like, we probably shouldn't say this on Zoom, but anyway, we should all just say it because y'all are incredible. So let me introduce the two of them, and then we'll go into the conversation, because I think while the senator talked about the infrastructure bill, there is another bill, as he talked about it, the Infrastructure of Humanity bill, or the Human Infrastructure bill, whichever we want to call it. It's an important bill, and we should dig into the details here because I think a lot of people don't know about it, and I think it's important that we dig in. So let me start with Taifa Smith Butler. This is why I keep wanting to read your name, because I keep transposing the name. Taifa Smith Butler is an incredible leader. She is the president of Demos since July. So excited. Before that, she ran the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And for those that don't understand Georgia policy and budget, or budget and policy, it's important to understand, to take budget, what we were just talking about with the bill, to policy. How do we actually implement and do something? And what is it going to take to make that happen? Taifa has been doing this in Georgia for many years. She was the president and CEO. She knows how to get things done. So now she's at Demos, taking this to the national level, same skill sets, but really pushing it even further across the country. And she brings comms, policy research, and data analytics. I mean, you've got to be the most in-demand person in the country these days with those skill sets, because that is a hard skill set to find. So Taifa, grateful that you're at Demos, grateful you're taking everything you've done in Georgia and going national. Really, really, really appreciate you being here. And again, just for your leadership in Georgia. Like, again, nobody was talking about Georgia 15 years ago. So we've come a very long way, and this is amazing. And then Ijen Poo, the other badass. You can't, there's not enough things you can say, but she's the National Executive Director of National Domestic Workers Alliance, a nonprofit that has really been looking at quality of work, dignity, and fairness for a number of workers who are in our caregiving, are cleaning our homes, many of them women of color, many of them immigrants. And Ijen, what you have built in these last 2 decades, it is amazing, the movement, but just the care and dignity by which you have been working and bringing these issues to light every year. That I don't know you personally, but I know everybody that knows you, and it's amazing. So thank you for everything that you're doing. So let's dig in while we're here. The senator talked about the infrastructure bill. So let's take if you don't mind, a few minutes to talk about that infrastructure bill. But I really want to move into the human infrastructure piece of this and the humanity bill, as we might call it. What does it mean, Taifa, for what you're doing at Demos, what you saw in Georgia to have this infrastructure bill passed?
Oh my goodness. Again, thank you so much for all the accolades. And I'm so honored to be sharing the stage with Ajen, huge fan, as she knows, of this work, of us trying to really advance a more caring society, but also just making sure that we have the resources needed. And of course, we've done this budget work, for me anyway, for the last 10 plus years of trying to talk about how do we invest in people, our number one asset, right, in this country. And we have not done that very well. And so to see at least this forward movement to talk about roads and bridges and the infrastructure needed to help people thrive and live a better quality of life, much like the senator said, broadband is one of the essential sort of tools and resources that is needed to keep people connected, quite honestly. And going around the state of Georgia for the last number of years and hearing and seeing the real challenges to education, to job access and quality jobs, because many of these rural communities or inner city communities are not connected. So I think this is a huge way to level the playing field. And when I went to South Georgia a few years ago, to hear them say, you know, our kids can't even learn in a way that other folks are learning because they don't have, you know, resources, particularly when the pandemic hit and people were sheltering in place and couldn't go to school. You have school buses in communities with hotspots because broadband access wasn't there. So let's talk about some of these state constitutions where their number one priority is to provide an adequate, you know, education. We could not do that for years, right, in these last couple. So broadband is huge. And in terms of just the transportation infrastructure of the roads going to and from carrying goods from the ports, but also into rural communities where they are desperate for additional jobs, this is a huge, huge opportunity to bring those kinds of jobs and resources and quality opportunities for our rural citizens. So we're excited to see it.
Taifa, just a note, I live in a community in Houston, Texas that didn't have that broadband when it happened. Like, we could barely just get 50 BPS in our home. And when the students next door needed access to the internet, they had to come over, and that was just on that piece. But most of them were doing the homework on their phone or their parents' phones. And the teachers who lived down the street were like, we don't know how to help our students. And we were trying to figure out how to do that. So I fully appreciate, now I didn't live in that in DC when I was there, but when I was in Houston, I saw it right front and center. So I fully appreciate that. Ajen, all of this matters, but then for people to go to work, they need to have care and they need help. And you know, the human infrastructure bill part of this is like, I think we just talk about it in numbers as it's 3.5 trillion or 2.5 trillion. Let's break that mold and let's start talking about the people that are affected and how do they go to jobs that are not always telling you what time they should be there and what time. How do we take care of the people so they can go to the jobs and have their kids still taken care of, because they don't have that?
It's a great question, and I just want to say publicly, congratulations to Taifa for taking over leadership of Demos. We're so happy and proud to have you leading. And also to you, Sonal, for your leadership of the Asian American Foundation, and your leadership and voice in our community and the AAPI community has been so powerful and so exciting to witness. And I'm just really proud to be able to talk to you too about the most consequential policy moment in generations for our country. And I really think about the infrastructure bill that the president signed today and the Build Back Better Act as two parts of a whole. Because really this idea that there's physical infrastructure and there's human infrastructure is kind of a false dichotomy, because both are jobs bills. And both are about humans and our ability to fully participate in an economy and in society in a way that is sustainable and that is healthy. And The piece of the Build Back Better Act, for example, that I've been working on has to do with care and caregiving. And the reality is that in our country, we just have never invested in our ability to take care of the people that we love in any way adequately. And we kind of thought to ourselves that if we, for some reason, couldn't afford childcare or couldn't find the right home care for our parents who are aging or have Alzheimer's, we blamed ourselves. We thought it was a personal failure. And the truth of the matter is, and I think the pandemic really helped us see this, that we are doing the very best we can, and we need public policy, programs, and a strong care workforce to support us, because it's just like bridges and tunnels. It is essential for our ability to participate in the economy and in society. Senator Casey says it really well. He says, some people need a bridge or a tunnel to get to work, and others need childcare. Others need home care for their aging parents or their loved ones with a disability. And we have to invest collectively as a country in those essential components of life and in our economy. And between the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act, it is a historic investment in all that we need in order to live well and prosper in this country, and is an investment in working people and the things that working class and low income people who are struggling. I mean, we live in a country where too many people are working incredibly hard, doing everything in their power, and still can't make ends meet. And these two bills together are about really addressing that. And especially when it comes to women who've disproportionately borne the brunt of caregiving and the care crisis in our country, especially women of color who disproportionately work in our care economy and are underpaid and overworked. This is a game changer. It's a game changer for them and therefore for all of us.
So Taifa, let me come back to you for a second here. And the thing that, one of the questions that came across here is like, the thing that everybody at least, has heard about is the number on the bill, not about what is the bill. And iGen gave us a really good insight into the care piece of this. Let's talk about what is in this Build Back Better bill that makes it so consequential for the next generations to come. We sort of compare it to the last time this happened, which was a very long time ago, but like, what does it mean and why is it consequential? Let's break it down for our audience. So as they go out and talk to their family members and others, that we can give them the points to say, this is what's in the bill and why it matters.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I'll tag team with iGen because I know she's deeply rooted in some of the pieces, and I'll defer to her leadership and talking points. I think what's most important for me is we think about equity, right? And making sure that there's fair inclusion for everyone so that all can reach their potential and thrive. I love that definition that Policy Link has used for a long, long time. But to me, if we're talking about ensuring this economic recovery is inclusive and equitable, what are the right kinds of levers and intervention that we can build and put into some policy solutions that will right the wrongs of the past, where there has been historic exclusion, particularly for Black and Brown communities, by the policy choices that government has made. So to me, this is a moment to whatever we offer that can right some of those wrongs and really have real good intention. And tax policy, fiscal policy is one of those areas that has historically been more advantageous for the wealthy and the rich. And quite honestly, is one of the most racist constructs in government. So the pieces that will expand the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit is a huge way to change tax policy so that more of our middle class and low income families striving to be in the middle class can really have some tax equity at the end of the day. More money in their pockets that factor in their low wages and their work and their children, right, in terms of their ability to thrive. So to me, if we're talking about some really important pieces that start to flip the switch on the inequities that we see throughout our system, those tax pieces of the EITC and the child tax credit are hypercritical.
David, can you give us a little bit more? What is the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit?
Sure. The earned income tax credit is for everyone who files their income taxes. There's a certain level of income that they earn that if they are low wage workers or low income workers, that they will qualify for a tax credit against that income. And they could actually either get income back, but it primarily goes toward those workers who, again, are low income. And there also is a factor that they have children. And so they're credited with children and low wage and are typically qualify for some type of tax credit. And there's two pieces to that, where they would earn that credit and get additional dollars, or even if what they pay is in excess of their tax liability, they get a credit or a check back that for that overage even still. So those are some of the things that have been debated at the state level about refundability for that credit, but certainly it is to reward work, and certainly for low-income workers. And that's a huge piece.
And Ajahn, that means a lot to the care workers that you are working with. But there's also other pieces in the bill about for children too. There's the work for there's tax credits for the parents that are working extraordinarily hard and feeling like they're just on a hamster wheel. And then there's there's pre-K that's also in this bill. And talk to us about what else is in this bill that is so important, especially to our economy, our care economy.
Think about everything that you need across a lifespan to take care of yourself and the people that you love. You need, from the time that you have a child, you need paid family and medical leave to be able to take time off to spend with a newborn and not have to worry about losing income, right? And that's in the bill. You need then childcare, so that you can return to work and pay the bills, bring home the bacon. And you want to make sure that you have affordable, quality childcare. And this bill invests in that, so that no working class family will have to pay more than 7% of their income on childcare, which is huge because so many people spend so much of their income on childcare. It's one of the reasons why so many women were pushed out of the workforce during the COVID pandemic, is because basically childcare centers were closing and they had to figure out, do I continue to work or do I pay for care? And if somebody's going to have to drop out of the workforce, it's usually the woman. And so anyway, childcare is essential. It also invests in universal pre-K, so making preschool universally accessible for 3 and 4-year-olds. Huge deal. I don't know how many of you out there have a 3 or 4-year-old, but you know what a big deal this is. It makes home and community-based care for people with disabilities and older adults much more accessible through the Medicaid program, which means that right now there's over 800,000 people who are on waiting lists who are eligible for Medicaid services but can't get access to them because the program is not funded. And this would allow for all these people who need services for loved ones with disabilities or older people to be able to have access to care in their homes and in their communities. This is a huge deal because it also saves taxpayers money. This is the thing that I really want to make sure people know, is that these investments are incredibly fiscally responsible and incredibly cost effective. So every day that we keep people out of nursing homes is a day that we save taxpayers money. Home and community-based care costs on average about 1/3 of what nursing home care costs. So by investing in our ability to provide home and community-based care, which by the way is the context that most of us want to age in, most of us want to stay at home and in the community, and we don't have those options because our program is not funded. This would invest in our ability to have access to those services, and it would make sure that the workers who provide those services earn a living wage and have real economic security so they can take care of their families too. And to Taifa's point earlier, 80% of the workers who are on waiting lists are people who are on waiting lists who are eligible for Medicaid services but can't get access to them because the program is not funded. This would invest in our ability to have access to those services, and it would make sure that the workers who provide those services earn a living wage and have real economic security so they can take care of their families too. And to Taifa's point earlier, This is a group of workers who have been excluded from protections and fair wages since the New Deal because of racism. Congress, when they enacted the New Deal labor laws, Southern Dixiecrats refused to support those laws if they included protections for farm workers and domestic workers who were mostly Black at the time. And so the entire New Deal moved forward with big exclusions of workers of color. And not only does this bill address that historic exclusion, but it prioritizes investments in these same workers at the forefront of this agenda for this Build Back Better economic agenda. That is profound from an equity standpoint and so long overdue. And it's going to secure not only those workers and their families, but all of us who need that care.
And you know, it's such a, I'm an economist by training, so I love the fact that you put in there that, that, you know, this is an investment, and it is, we spend our time worrying about the immediate cost, and we never think about the long-term costs of not making that investment. And
Yes.
that's the challenge. I think the senator talked about this, which is like, this is long overdue payments on infrastructure that should have been fixed a long time ago. Well, it's the same with people, right? If we make an investment in people, we see returns on people, but we never talk about the return on people. We only talk about the return on infrastructure as a road or an investment, but we don't think about people as an investment. And I think your point about making that investment in people and giving them the opportunity to do work and to live a good life and live a productive life, all of the things that we want people to be able to do matters. And these are simple things. I mean, not simple in the sense of like, you know, complicated in implementation, but simple in the sense of like universal pre-K. We're not arguing about kids getting universal pre-K. We know even in red states like Oklahoma, when they have done it, it has actually had really great, you know, impact on families. You know, child care tax credits, we all have to take care of family members, children. Like, it's important that we have that. This is,
I mean, what excites me, if I could add, Sonal, is that, you know, what Aijen laid out in the bill are those like huge core components, but also I think the ones that were most suffered during this pandemic. And so if this infusion really helps sort of helps buoy those, you know, particular industries, childcare, again, helping families have more money in their pockets. Of course, the housing crisis that we are all currently seeing with the eviction. So having more dollars to help afford, you know, create more affordable housing is also going to be a big component of this, which will be helpful long term and also in the short term. So I think those are the core areas as we think about families' budget and where they're spending their dollars. And of course, those huge barriers that keep people from getting into work, wages, and then of course housing and healthcare as another core piece of that. It's exciting to see this level of investment being made right now. So we just got to continue to advocate for it.
So Dave, I know both you and Aijen have talked about this, but I'm going to ask you a specific question because we did get a question from someone in the audience about the cost of these bills. So all these detractors that are talking about the cost, can you just put, I mean, you did budget and policy. Can you put this into context for all of us? Like, we keep talking about cost and we don't talk about people. Aijen talked about why this was a long-term investment, but give us some insight into why this, you know, this is not just about the cost.
Yeah, it's not about the cost. I think, you know, we all continue to say that this is a down payment for years and years of underinvestment and no investment. And what I think is a tactic is to scare people when you talk about $1.something trillion and people can't, you know, sort of put their hands around that. But when you think about the quick and, you know, when we choose to give away trillions of dollars in a tax code by allowing, you know, the top 1% or corporations to not pay their fair share and give them tax breaks, which also are very much eroding the base of dollars and support that we can invest, you don't get that same of it costs this, which is what, you know, government has done for a long, long time. You know, we've advocated in different states around the country, you know, that billions and billions of of dollars that is given away or foregone because of different types of incentives for corporations, right, or for businesses. And this is an opportunity for us to really name that corporations are not paying their fair share. And that's how we're going to pay for some of this, because I think 50% of 50 of America's largest corporations pay zero in terms of income tax. So we know that we've got to right that wrong and make sure that corporations are paying their fair share and investing in our human infrastructure, if you will. And it pains me to hear corporations talk about, you know, their willingness to engage and support racial equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making all of these sort of grandiose statements about equity and needing a strong workforce and strong infrastructure to be able to, you know, provide the jobs and the profits that they want, but at the same time, thwarting every effort of this bill. And corporations have paid huge in terms of their lobbying expenses. In a report we just recently co-authored with People's Action, they are spending hand over fist to thwart this bill's movement. And so this is another way that we see that people, you know, folks who are listening in on this call, that we have got to engage in this, because corporations, if they have their way, will not allow this bill to go forward. Not only because it will ask them to pay more, but because of what we know we need to do for humanity right now is to bolster families, bolster this infrastructure so that people can move forward in this economy. And so to me, that's the important point of our advocacy moving forward.
I wonder if we just added up all the amounts spent on PR and advocacy, I mean, and the legislative, you know, pushes on not paying taxes, whether that it would add up to just actually paying the taxes.
Right. The hundreds of millions of dollars they've spent, that we've identified in these disclosures of them lobbying to fight this bill, again, is money not well spent.
Yeah, well, and it's also, I think in the bill, if I'm not wrong, and Jen, correct me here, I think we're actually just putting taxes back to where they were in the Obama administration. And it's just the tax cut that they got that is changing. And yet there's this big, massive fight about not wanting to pay taxes. Am I wrong on this?
You're not wrong. And just the president has underscored this over and over again. Neither the infrastructure bill nor the Build Back Better Act is going to increase taxes for anyone earning less than $400,000. That's a lot of money. $400,000. No one earning $400,000 or less is going to see their taxes go up a penny. This is all going to be paid for because members of Congress have been working on, and the White House have been working on, a way to make sure that it is all paid for, and is paid for through people and corporations who have evaded taxes unfairly, actually paying their fair share. So nobody is getting harmed. Nobody, you know, like everybody is just, it's time that people who have not paid their fair share in taxes actually contribute to the collective good. It's just a simple part of what it means to be a part of a democratic society.
So I want to touch base on, I think, one of the most important topics that both of you have raised, and I think that is on the importance of equity. And also correcting the inequities and understanding what the inequities. Jen, you walked into it a bit about, you talked about it a bit in terms of what was going on in the South and sort of how this bill corrects it. I think, Taifa, you talked about this. I think it's good for us to talk about this because I don't know that everybody even understands how the laws were constructed in order to know that the inequities were built into the laws themselves. And what we're talking about is saying, let's make it fair. Let's not even like, we actually made it unfair on purpose. So Taifa, I'd love to start with you, and then Jen, if you can also add in, give us other examples of the inequities that this bill is correcting, because it's important that we be able to say them on a constant basis.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. I mean, Jen already pointed out, some of the national labor laws and the New Deal that excluded agricultural workers and domestic workers because they were Black. And so they were not able to have the same kinds of worker protections and worker rights as other industries, right? And even there's a long sordid history of labor, and it's, unionizing and organizing and how Black folks were excluded back then when collective bargaining started happening. I mean, and then we see this in the housing arena, some of the choices that government made around redlining and the activity with banks and governments, who was eligible for certain types of loans and mortgages and where those community lines were drawn. And it actually benefited white people where they lived in the suburbs, created wealth for them. And, Black and brown communities, folks of color were relegated to certain public housing or other types of communities. And you see that these urban enclaves, these public housing communities were intentionally designed by government. And again, long-term conversations about wealth, about the racial wealth gap was in fact created by these choices around housing, around jobs and opportunities. Of course, we see historic gender discrimination and racial discrimination in hiring practices, and of course in wages. And for the simple fact that you see today many women of color who are in these segregated industries of employment where they are typically relegated to low income, that this occupational segregation that Rebecca Dixon at NELP talks about, that is real. And of course, Jen talks about it as well. So when you have industries like care and education and service and retail and hospitality that are largely employed by Black and brown families and workers, and then those are the ones who don't get the paid leaves or the other kinds of health benefits and personnel benefits, it creates this inequity that we see across all of these industries, and it thwarts long-term wealth building for these families from a wage, income, education, health, housing, all of those things combined. And so we have to tackle all of those things individually, but with a comprehensive vision for, again, equity.
Jen, do you want to add in?
I would just say that there are so many reasons to make equity a priority in an economic agenda. And there are moral reasons, there are practical reasons, but it really is about what kind of future we want in this country for our families. And what might be possible if inequity wasn't a barrier to people's ability to work, live well, care for the people they love, find joy, realize the possibilities and potential before them. And all of us, right? And a friend of mine named Franklin Leonard often talks about the brilliance of the film Hidden Figures, which is that, you can't help but walk away from that movie thinking, wow, the Black women who were at the center of that story, they faced every racial and gender inequity and obstacle imaginable, and they still managed to take us to the moon. Imagine if they did not have to face those barriers, where would we be as a country? What would be possible?
I love that.
That is the question that this Build Back Better Act puts on the table for us. Imagine what might be possible if we centered equity so that inequity wouldn't be an obstacle to our ability to do great things.
Yeah, I love that, Jen. And I think both of you, just reminding everyone that, imagine what the country could look like if equity was at the center and everybody could reach their potential and to do everything that they have the potential to do. We're so busy talking about why someone did it as opposed to what can I do to help someone achieve it even more. And I think we have to recenter our brains on that too. I think all of us. And Taifa, somebody actually said in the chat, which I think is such an important point, suppression also came with where the roads were built and how they were built and how many communities of color were affected by the actual infrastructure that, the physical infrastructure that was built. Absolutely. It affected communities of color. And it was, I think it's something that we have to remember and we have to correct also. It's not just how we build the next generation of infrastructure will matter.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit, while we're on inequity, I want to talk about healthcare, because so many women of color have been treated poorly in healthcare. And this is just one of the places where you see dramatic inequities. And this bill, Build Back Better bill, takes on some of this. Ajin, can I start with you here? Talk a little bit about what's in this healthcare piece of this and why it matters for equity.
Well, I think some of the pieces are expanding access to healthcare through the Affordable Care Act in states that have not yet expanded Medicaid. And that's huge, especially for workers like the ones that I work with every single day who can barely make ends meet, let alone afford healthcare, and are eligible for Medicaid, but actually don't live in a state where their governors have expanded Medicaid. So this would make sure that everyone can have access, especially low-income workers, to health coverage. And there's big investments also. The pieces that aren't talked about as much are maternal health. There's a huge amount of investment in maternal health, especially Black maternal health, because we are a country that, despite how advanced and great we are, we have a maternal health crisis, especially among Black women. And this addresses that. So there's a number of healthcare investments in here that mean a tremendous amount for the women that I work with and for so many of our families and communities around the country. And that's the thing about this legislation, is that there is quite a bit here, and sometimes that makes it hard to kind of capture when we're trying to explain to people. But I think the key here is that all of the everyday struggles of everyday Americans in this country around our basic needs, care, health, jobs, getting to work housing, on a bridge, housing, where we live, there are really meaningful investments in trying to make progress on those things for everyday people. And that's the thing to really remember, and health is among those things.
Ava, where you live and how you can get to work and all of that matters. I mean, I loved Ajin's point of it feels complicated. The bill feels complicated, but it's like going to a doctor and having the arm doctor only look at the arm and the leg doctor only looking at the leg, and realizing that you're a person. So this bill is actually looking at a person and trying to help everybody as a person, not the arm or the eyes or the ears. From a budget perspective, let me ask you, this bill makes sense, right? And people keep talking about the numbers, but put it into sense with us into it works.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, again, it goes back to the long-term vision of this country. If we do, in fact, want everyone to reach their full potential and thrive, regardless of, location, residency, skin color, disability status, immigrant status, whatever the case may be, we want everyone living in this country to be able to thrive and live in strong communities and be healthy and well, and their children to have have great education, you know, all the things that you think that we would want together collectively. And so to be able to say that this $1 billion investment in all of these components, comprehensive components of someone's life and their families, is a great investment for our country. In the short term, there may be costs, but in the long term, we get to having a stronger economy, a stronger, vibrant America, because families are doing well, they're healthier, right, as a result of this. They have stronger economic security, which again is what we want for all families. So I think these are the components that we need to sell and make people aware of. And like Ajin said, there is a lot in this. So how do we break this out so that we can help people understand how it will benefit them? And I think that's where our job is going to be. But also, I think, you know, as we, all of the other narratives around why this is a bad thing because of inflation and all of these other things, we have to understand, again, there may be short-term costs associated with this, but again, the long-term cost of not doing it, I think, is the bigger issue we need to discuss. You know, if we do not ensure an equitable recovery for all these families that have struggled so much through this pandemic and continue to, we know that not every Black and brown family worker who wants to work has not returned. Women, right, who want to go back into the workforce, they have not fully been able to engage because of all these areas that continue to be crippled in terms of investment in their infrastructure, like childcare. So we've got to do this for the long-term viability of this country. And we talk about competitiveness, you know, paid leave. We are one of amongst the only, you know, developed countries, nations in the world that does not provide paid leave for its families. What is that? So I just, again, think that, you know, America has some work to do, not only for reconciling the past and these policy choices that have created the inequity, but if we really want to ensure long-term for Black, brown, white families, regardless, we've got to do this, because I think it will really hinder our own economic viability long-term.
So true. Let's bust a couple of myths here, because I think we've got to help our audience bust the myths I'm sure people are hearing all the time. Ijen, myth number one, there's all these jobs available and no one's taking them. People aren't coming back to work.
It is not true. First of all, like we said earlier, as long as we have childcare centers that are closed, people who don't have paid family medical leave, 82% of domestic workers don't have access to the care and the supports they need for their kids to go in order to go back to work. So until those pieces are in place, it's always going to be a set of impossible choices for parents and caregivers, especially when they're returning to low-wage jobs, where they're basically paying their entire paycheck for care. That's what we're trying to address here with Build Back Better. And, you know, many of these jobs are essential jobs, and we spent the pandemic applauding the essential workers, and we should do more than applaud. We should make sure that they have the care, the health care, the child care, the pre-K, the long-term care they need, so that they can actually continue to do the essential work we need them to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, if your child is sent home for 10 days because somebody in the class had COVID,
what are you going to do?
Oh, right. Like, yes. Taifa, myth number two, this is going to create inflation in the economy.
Well, now I'm no economist, so Sanal, you might have to take this one. But I do know that there are short-term costs associated with this. And as we see the supply chain and all of these sort of implications or consequences that are going through our economy right now, given COVID, there may be some short-term increased costs because of demand and supply right now. But again, that's not long-term implications. And if anything else, those things we anticipate will level out.
And I just want to add here, inflation isn't because of these bills. Inflation was because demand for goods increased.
Yes.
And that has created the inflation. It's not because these bills went through and it created inflation. So we should not mix two concepts here.
Very
but I think it's important to recognize that this was already happening. the bills going through have allowed us to go back to work, to go back to school, to do all of these things. But that has also meant we've had to buy clothes for our kids and shoes and work clothes again. Oh my God. So all of those things, it's important, and that demand has changed. And globally, I think we were just short supply across the board. So these two things are not mixed. Go ahead, Ijen, please.
Except that actually, by investing in care and making it possible for more people to return to work, we're actually going to help address some of the supply chain problems that are part of the reason why there is inflation. So
absolutely,
it only helps actually solve the problem.
Excellent.
That is a very fair point. So we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask you two final questions. So question one to both of you, what can everybody here in this audience do to make sure we can get the Build Back Better plan, through? And what is it that we all need to do? Because we know that the lobbyists are being paid, but what do we need to do? So Taif, I'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say, one of the things that I've talked about for years and years and years is this political will and there's public will. And oftentimes our lawmakers and leaders in these seats, whether they're in legislative seats at the state capitals or in DC, the political will has to move and be pushed by public will. And so I would just encourage all of us to be contacting our lawmakers, making the case known of what we want and what we need to recover in this economy, and that this Build Back Better plan can advance. And what's frustrating for me is to see one or two senators having a tremendous sway and thwarting the will of the people and the will of the majority in Congress right now. So there's a lot of frustration, as the Senator Warnock said, but I think this is where we've got to make demands and make our voices as loud as possible right now. That's how we can engage.
Yep. So this week is crucial because the House of Representatives is supposed to vote this week on the Build Back Better Act. And there was an agreement that was reached among House Democrats to move it to the floor for a vote. So we need to make sure that our members of Congress hear from us this week that we urgently need Build Back Better to pass out of the House this week. We don't want to keep delaying. We want to build off of the momentum of signing the infrastructure bill into law, take that momentum and keep it going so that we can get Build Back Better done and pass it out of the House this week. And then we're going to need to start putting our attention towards the Senate and making sure that every member of the Senate Democratic Caucus hears from us about just how urgent and important this is. I think all of us will be able to look back on this moment when we do pass this bill and be able to tell our grandchildren, our kids and our grandkids, that we were a part of this really historic moment. But we have to get there, and the responsibility on people like us to step up and do more in these times and do more consistently is a little bit, it's heavier on us. We have to do it because nobody else is going to.
So true. Last question for both of you. What gives you hope? Ijen.
Just this reflecting on Senator Warnock and Georgia, and just how many people showed up to vote last year so that we could have this incredible moment. Right? We, despite a pandemic, despite voter suppression, despite so many barriers, we showed up and we voted and we elected this president and this Congress so that we could have this moment. We earned it, and we're going to deliver huge transformative change. Then we're going to go back again and brag to the voters and pat ourselves on the back, have a big celebration so that everybody feels energized to come back out and vote again. And that cycle is the heart and soul of democracy, and that really excites me because it's about us.
Taifa.
Amen to that. I would just say I'm excited about the we can't go back. And the work of the movement of, again, being here in Georgia, seeing it happen, seeing the investment over time, and the declaration that we refuse to go back to the status quo. You know, through the election process, the voices were a huge part of why we have this governing moment. And people are saying, like Ajin, we're going to take advantage of this, but by golly, they are going to make sure they hear us. And I think the excitement that I see about strategy right now and the ground game, and us not in an off cycle, although we're about to be in a cycle, is to make sure that we use that same momentum to keep people engaged, and that we don't sit back on our heels, but we have to keep working. And to see that kind of strategy conversation being had is the thing that excites me.
As I said from the top, we had two badass women who are incredible leaders in our community. I think to take away from this conversation, and I say this to everyone, is know this bill. We've given you enough details here. Let's go out, let's go convince our communities this is important, to make the phone calls, to make sure our congressmen know. If the lobbyists are out there doing it, we can do it too. And we have the ability to make these calls. We have the ability to let our congressional members know, let's get the bill through. And it's going to take all of us collectively to do it. It's not going to be, you know, just the Georgia team or just the Texas team or just the Connecticut team or just the Illinois team. It's going to be all of us together to make this happen. But if we want the Build Back Better bill to go through the way the infrastructure bill went through, it means that we all have to do our part. So I cannot be more grateful to Taifa and Ijen for taking the time on, you know, a Tuesday evening and Monday evening. See, I'm like, I can't even get the days straight anymore. Monday evening to have this conversation, but we got work to do. So in order to get to the place where Ijen and Taifa were talking about, the positive, we got to get the work done now. So once in a lifetime chance to get this done. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. It's super important, and please stay tuned. Please stay in touch with us, and please pay attention to what's happening with Build Back Better, because we got to get this bill through.
Yes, we do.
Yes,
Let's
we
do
do.
it.
Thank you both.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.